I think honestly something we do need to put on the table is nuclear. Is start talking about nuclear, and I know that's extra frightening at a time when there are nuclear plants that operate in Ukraine, and the concept of them getting bombed or shelled right now is obviously a horrifying prospect. But we are running out of time and options is one of those things. I do not think it's I don't think it's beyond reasonable at this point to say that if this is something that we effectively want to fight against, which is, rapid climate change and all the detrimental effects that it's going to have on, global populations as well as life, then it's something we need to discuss. Oh, this is interesting. There's a new article from Naomi Klein. I don't know if you've been seeing the trucker convoys that are taking place in the United States are not getting quite the traction that the one in Canada did. It's pretty ridiculous. Nostalgia for the empire is what seems to drive Vladimir Putin. That and a desire to overcome the shame of publishing economic shock therapy imposed on Russia at the end of the Cold War. Nostalgia for American greatness is part of what drives the movement of Donald Trump still leads. That and a desire to overcome the shame of having to face the villainy of white supremacy that shaped the founding of the United States and mutilates it still. Nostalgia is what animates the Canadian truckers who occupied Ottawa for the better part of a month, wielding their red and white flags like a conquering army, evoking a simpler time when the consciences were disturbed by thoughts of the bodies of Indigenous children whose remains are still being discovered on the grounds of these genocidal institutions that once all dared to call themselves schools. This is not the warm and cozy nostalgia of the fuzzily remembered childhood pleasures. It's an enraged and annihilated nostalgia that clings to false memories of past glories against all mitigating evidence. All of these nostalgia-based movements and figures share a longing for something else, something which may seem unrelated, but it is not. A nostalgia for a time when fossil fuels could be extracted from Earth without uneasy thoughts of mass extinction, or children demanding their rights to the future, or intergovernmental panels on climate change reports, like the one just released yesterday that reads the words of the United Nations Secretary Antonio Guterres like an atlas of human suffering and a damning indictment of a failed climate leadership. Putin, of course, leads a petrostate, one that has defiantly refused to diversify its economic dependence on oil and gas, despite the devastating effect of the commodity rollercoaster on its people, and despite the realities of climate change. Canada too. Trump is obsessed with the easy money that fossil fuels offer, and as a president made a climate denial a signature policy. The Canadian truckers, for their part, not only chose idling 18-wheelers that smuggled jerry cans of the protest symbols, but the leadership of the movement is also deeply rooted in the extra oil of Alberta tar sands. Before it was the Freedom Convoy, many of these same players staged the dress rehearsal known as the United We Roll. A 2019 convoy combined a zealous defense of oil pipelines, opposition to carbon pricing, and anti-immigrant xenophobia, and explicit nostalgia for a white Christian Canada. Through petrodollars underwrite these players and forces, it's critical to understand that oil is a stand for a broader worldview, a cosmology deeply entwined within manifest destiny and the doctrine of discovery, which ranked human as well as non-human life inside a rigid hierarchy, with white Christian men at the top. Oil in this context is the symbol of the extractivist mindset, not only a perceived God-given right to keep extracting fossil fuels, but also the right to keep taking whatever they want, leave poison behind, and never look back. Wow, I've been a fan of Naomi Klein for a while. I think Shock Doctrine is a really, really good book, but it's really fascinating to see someone finally try and tie so many of these things together, because these are a lot of concepts that I've been thinking for a while, but then to see them all combined here is really well written. This is why the fast-moving climate crisis represents not just an economic threat to people invested in the extractive sectors, but also the cosmological threat to the people invested in this worldview, because climate change is the earth telling us that nothing is free, that the age of white male human dominion has ended, and that there's no such thing as a one-way relationship comprised only of taking, that all actions have reactions. These centuries of digging and spewing are now unleashing forces that make even the sturdiest structures created by industrial societies, coastal cities, highways, oil rigs look vulnerable and frail. And within the extractivist mindset, it is impossible to accept. The extractivist mindset? Is that a new term? Did she coin that? Given their common cosmologies, it should come as no surprise that Putin, Trump, and the Freedom Convoys are reaching towards one across another across disparate geographies and wildly different circumstances. So Trump praises Canada's peaceful movement of patriotic truckers, workers, and families protesting for their basic rights and liberties. Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon cheer on Putin while the truckers sport their MAGA hats. Randy Hillier, a member of Ontario legislator who's one of the convoy's loudest supporters, declares on Twitter that far more people have and will die from the shot, the COVID vaccines, than in the Russia-Ukraine war. And how about Ontario restaurant that last week put out its daily special boards with the announcement that Putin is not occupying Ukraine, but instead standing up to the Great Reset, the Satanists, and fighting against the enslavement of humanity. These alliances seem deeply weird and unlikely at first, but look a little closer. It's clear that they are bound together by an attitude towards one thing that clings to an idealized version of the past and is steadfast refuses to face difficult truths about the future. They also share in delight about the exercise of raw power, the 18-wheelers, the pedestrian versus the pedestrian, the shouted manufacturer of reality versus the cautious scientific report, the nuclear arsenal versus the machine gun. This is the energy currently surging in many different spheres, starting wars, attacking seats of government, and defiantly destabilizing our planet's life support systems. This is the ethos at the root of so many democratic crises, geopolitical crises, and the climate crisis. A violent clinging to a toxic past and a refusal to face a more entangled and irrational future, one bounded by the limits of what people on the planet can take. It is a pure expression of what the late bell hooks have often described with a playful wink, the imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy. Because sometimes all the big guns are needed to describe our world accurately. And also, good on Naomi Klein for not falling for the whole narrative that, like, well, what Putin is doing is not exactly anything related to imperialism or, it's certainly not anything related to, the structures of white supremacy or things like that. After all, he's going there to purge the country respectively of all the Nazis. He's already said he's doing that, so that has to be what he's doing and why he's doing it. This is not imperialism. This is, of course, just reclaiming. It's irredentism at the worst, right? He's just reclaiming lost territory from, a forgotten time. That narrative coming out of I won't say all, but certain sections of the left has been just devastatingly sad to watch, to say the least. What is the Great Reset? The Great Reset is different things to different people. To conspiracy theorists like Alex Jones, the Great Reset is, of course, the New World Order trying to control us more through a variety of means. The actual Great Reset talks that have been coming up in various, global think tanks, neoliberal projects, neoliberal think tanks are about moving towards, I believe, the way they're stating it is more compassionate capitalism. I guess maybe similar to some of the hearkening you heard around the time when Keynesian economics was coming to be thought as an alternative to what was happening that led to the Great Depression, and then implementing certain programs that will help out people more. That kind of idea, but doing that in the modern era is how it's being labeled. It's something that obviously concerns me because I'm obviously a little bit worried about when you have a combination of giant think tanks and organizations that deal in free marketplace neoliberal economics talking about trying to change the way we do business. I don't always like it's just color me cautious about it because while on paper the whole thing as it's advertised, it really has this veneer of being about changing the way our current destructive systems are currently treating like a vast majority of the population. It's a hard thing to believe in its performance. The most urgent political task at hand is to put pressure on Putin so that he sees the criminal invasion of Ukraine as too great of a risk to sustain. But that is only arrested the beginnings. There's a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future for the planet, says Hans Otto Portner, co-chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, working group that organized the landmark report released this week. If there is a uniting political task of our time, it is to provide a comprehensive response to this conflagration of toxic nostalgia, and within a modern world birthed in genocide and dispossession, that requires laying out a vision for the future where we have never seen or where we have never been before. Something that has been concerning me is that as this, all these world events are happening and everything is happening so rapidly, what is one way to try and take hold of the messaging, and not just from the left, but from people who are looking to, discuss and promote certain ideas publicly about this kind of stuff? What is the best way to refine the messaging, massage the messaging, if you will, into ways that could benefit humanity? Pointing out things like, yes, Canada is a petro state in that it is highly dependent on the oil sands of Alberta, Alberta. And also there are thousands of jobs linked to the oil sands of Alberta. I think something that is very beneficial about the way that someone like Bernie Sanders advocates for moving towards a Green New Deal, and it would be that people who are in existing fields, because there's thousands of coal workers in the United States, for example, and in Canada there is thousands of people who work on the tar sands, to be able to give them and provide them training to be able to merge into new industries that are not so detrimental for the environment. Which I think would be a very, very good thing. The leadership of our various countries, with very few exceptions, are nowhere near meeting this challenge. Putin and Trump are backward-facing nostalgic figures, and they have plenty of company on the hard right. Jair Bolsonaro was elected for playing on nostalgia and Brazil's era of military rule, and in the Philippines, alarmingly, is poised to elect Ferdinand Marcos Jr. as the next president, son of the late dictator who pillaged and terrorized the nation through much of the 70s and 80s. But this is not only a right-wing crisis. Many liberal standard bearers are deeply nostalgic figures too, offering as anecdotes to surging fascism nothing but warmed-up neoliberalism, openly aligned with the predatory corporate interests from big pharma to big banks, and that have shredded living standards. Joe Biden was elected on the comforting promise of a return to pre-Trump normal, never mind that this was the same soil for which Trumpism grew. Justin Trudeau is the younger version of the same impulse, a shallow attention economy echo of his father, the late Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau. In 2015, Trudeau Jr.'s first statement on the world stage was, "Canada is back." Biden's 5 years later was, "America is back, ready to lead the world." We will not defeat the forces of toxic nostalgia with these weak doses of marginally less toxic nostalgia. It's not enough to be back. We are in desperate need of new. The good news is that we now know what it looks like to fight the forces enabling imperial aggression. Right-wing pseudo-populism, the climate breakdown at the same time. It looks very much like a Green New Deal, a framework to get fossil fuels by investing in family-supporting unionized jobs doing meaningful work, like building green affordable homes and good schools, starting with the most systematically abandoned and polluted communities first. And that requires moving away from the fantasy of limitless growth and investing in the labor of care and repair. The Green New Deal, or Red, Black, and Green New Deal, is our best hope for building a sturdy, multiracial, working-class coalition based on finding common ground across divides. It also happens to be the best way to cut off petrodollars flowing to people like Putin, since green economies that have beat addiction to endless growth don't need imported oil and gas as much. And it's also how we cut off oxygen to the pseudo-populism of Trump, Carlson, and Bannon, whose bases are expanding because they are far better at harnessing the rage directed at Davos elites than the Democrats whose leaders, for the most part, are those elites. And this is a scary thing, by the way, is that the recruitment of the right, I mean, look no further than Canada. Canada has been, with the trucker convoy, an example to the world of this idea that we have this sanitized country that everyone thinks is like completely peaceful, that can do no wrong. There is not a Nazi problem in Canada, that's for sure. They don't have any issues with that. And then you see members of the far right in Canada effectively organizing something that blossomed and ballooned with some very simple messaging. And I'm not saying that all the people in the trucker rally were far right. They absolutely were not. It was a combination of people who are very angry at the Trudeau government, very angry at what they perceive as an out-of-touch liberal, and that combined with a whole bunch of other groups that were very mad at COVID mandates, mask mandates, safety procedures, stuff like that, that they saw infringing upon their freedom. But that, again, that entire movement, the spark that lit it off was just a group of about 6 individuals, all of whom have very strong ties to the far right in this country. So, and people often point out that, like, Pat King, the white nationalist, he's a clown. He's an absolute, ass clown. The guy is a fucking disgrace of a human being. How in the world could someone like him pull it off? That should show you how frightening it can be when there's a whole bunch of money poured into something that effectively starts making this messaging something a lot more related to populism. Freedom. Things that everyone can identify with. Everyone wants freedom. That's a universal message. Yes, freedom. We all yearn to be free, especially from the tyranny of blank. So if you start doing that and it starts to pull people in and pulls more and more people in and starts pulling in people globally, as I guess we're going to start looking at this New Zealand thing that just happened, look what occurs. This is all disaster capitalist charade of any kind that I've written about too many times before. First, China will keep buying Russian oil regardless of what happens in the Marcellus Shale or the Alberta tar sands. Secondly, the timelines are fantastical. There's no such thing as selling short-term fossil fuel play. Every one of these projects being flogged as a solution to dependence on Russian fossil fuels would take years to have an impact, and in order to get their sunk costs to make financial sense, the project would need to stay in operation for decades. In defiance of the increasingly desperate warnings warnings that we have been receiving from the scientific community. But of course, the push for new fossil projects in North America is not about helping Ukrainians or weakening Putin. The real reason the old pipe dreams are being dusted off is far more crass. This war made them vastly more profitable overnight. In the week that Russia invaded Ukraine, the European oil benchmark Brent crude reached $105 a barrel, a price not seen since 2014, and is hovering above $100. That's twice what it was at the end of 2020. Banks and energy companies are desperate to make the most of this price rally in Texas, Pennsylvania, and Alberta. As surely as Putin is determined to reshape Eastern Europe's post-Cold War map, this power play by the fossil fuel sector stands to reshape the energy map. The climate justice movement has won some very important battles over the last decade. It has succeeded in banning fracking in the entire country, states, and provinces. Huge pipelines like the Keystone XL pipeline have been blocked. So have many export terminals and various Arctic drilling forays. Indigenous leadership has played a central role in nearly every fight, and remarkably, as of this week, $40 trillion worth of endowment and pension funds from the 1,500 institutions have committed to some form of fossil fuel divestment, thanks to a decade of dogged investment organizing. But there is a secret our movement often keeps from themselves. Since the price of oil plummeted in 2015, we have been fighting an industry with one hand tied behind its back, and that's because the cheaper, easier access to oil and gas is mostly depleted in North America. So the pitch battles over new projects have primarily been over unconventional, costlier to extract resources, fossil fuels trapped in shale rock, or under seabed in the deep ocean, or under Arctic ice as semi-solid sludge of the Alberta tar sands. Many of these new fossil fuel frontiers only became profitable after the US invaded Iraq in 2003, which sent oil prices soaring. Suddenly, it made economic sense to make those multi-billion-dollar investments to extract oil from the deep ocean, or to turn Alberta's muddy bitumen into refined oil. The boom years were upon us, with the Financial Times describing the frenzy in tar sands as North America's biggest resource boom since the Klondike gold rush. However, when the price of oil collapsed in 2015, industry's determination to keep growing at such a frenetic pace wavered. In some cases, investors weren't sure if they would earn their money back, which led to some major pullbacks from the Arctic and tar sands. And with profits and stock prices down, divestment organizers were suddenly able to make the case that fossil fuel stocks weren't just immoral, they were a lousy investment, which is actually going to be way more effective, even on capitalists' own terms. Well, Putin's actions have united the hand behind big oil's back and turned it into a fist. This explains the recent wave of attacks on climate movement and on a handful of Democratic politicians who had advanced science-based climate action. Representative Tom Reed, a Republican from New York, claimed last week the United States has the energy resources to knock Russia out of the oil and gas market entirely, but we don't need to use those resources because of President Biden's partisan pandering to the environmental extremists of the Democratic Party. The precise opposite is true. If governments, many of whom ran promising Green New Deal-like policies over the past decade and a half, had actually implemented them, Putin would not be able to flout international law and opinion as he's been doing so flagrantly, secure in the belief that he will still have customers for his increasingly profitable hydrocarbons. The underlying crisis we face in North America and Western European countries have failed to build out the fossil fuel infrastructure that allowed to displace Russian oil and gas. It is just all of us, the US, Canada, Germany, Japan, are still consuming obscene and unprecedented amounts of oil and gas, and indeed energy, period. We know the way out of this crisis. Ramp up the infrastructure for renewables, power homes with wind and solar, electrify our transportation. This, I'm going to be honest with you, is the part where you kind of lose me, because I don't think you're ever going to be able to sell I don't think you're ever going to be able to sell people on this idea that this transfer is going to be plausible in our current geopolitical paradigm, considering you have countries like Germany that have been working effectively to transfer almost exclusively to green energy, and now at this crisis are going to be met with huge hardships as a result. I think honestly something we do need to put on the table is nuclear. Is start talking about nuclear. And I know that's extra frightening at a time when there are nuclear plants that operate in Ukraine, and the concept of them getting bombed or shelled right now is obviously a horrifying prospect. But we are running out of time and options is one of those things. I do not think it's I don't think it's beyond reasonable at this point to say that if this is something that we effectively want to fight against, which is, rapid climate change and all the detrimental effects that it's going to have on, global populations as well as life, then it's something we need to discuss. Nuclear is too expensive and takes too long to build, according to Yanis. If there's no long-term solution for nuclear waste, it shouldn't be on the table at all. Well, the problem being is that we as a species have huge energy demands, and we're not good at turning those off. It seems we're not good at requiring less energy. I say that as someone who lives in North America. North America, for all our posturing and all our like, oh yes, we should be conservationists, we use an obscene amount of energy compared to a lot of other countries around the world. I don't think there's any winning the argument if I want to come to the table and say, everybody, we need to, I don't even need to go full Anprim on this, but like, hey, everybody, we need to really tone down the amount of energy we use. I think everyone should avoid buying PS5s for a variety of reasons, and we should start concentrating on other things like community gardening. I don't think I'm going to change any minds. I think Anprim are coming. You've been waiting for it. Everyone's been waiting for it. It's about time. We're going to return to Monkey. All right. I am personally very ready to return to Monkey. It's been a while, and it's been a long time coming, and I'm here for that. And obviously, I loves my science. I also do love the idea of things like cold fusion, things that can produce vast amounts of energy for very, very little carbon footprint being at the other end of it. It's just like, it's not within the time frame we have reasonable to suspect that the cold fusion reactors that are currently trying to get up and running around the world are going to be capable of meeting our energy needs within the short term. Every few decades, a new Fukushima is also something to look forward to. If you're not eating your own toenail clippings for sustenance, you're literally part of the problem. That's the first comment that I've actually agreed with, and that's why I'm here to advocate for that. That's what we're going to talk about. We're going to be fundraising money today for toenail clippers so that everyone can sustain themselves. What is it? The law of perpetual motion. We'll design the first perpetual self-sustaining system, and then there's that. What is the plural of Dracula? It's Draculas, isn't it? Draculae? Dracules? I don't know. That is a good question, though. I don't think it's one I'm qualified to answer. Watching these geopolitical chess pieces fly above a board in a matter of days, along with the latest wave of dramatic sanctions against Russia, banks, and air travel, there have been plenty of reasons for dread, including a repeat of measures that punish the poor for the crimes of the rich. But there are flashes of optimism too. What is heartening is less the substance of any individual move than their sheer speed and decisiveness. As the early months of the pandemic, the response to Russia's invasion should remind us of the complexity of our financial and energy systems. It turns out that they can still be transformed by decisions of mere mortals. That is true, actually. Like, it's astounding to see how quickly things move and can move in that regard. It's worth pausing over some of the implications. If Germany can abandon an $11 billion pipeline because it's suddenly seen as immoral, it always was, then all fossil fuel infrastructure that violates our right to have a stable climate should be up for debate. If BB can walk away from a 20% stake in Russian oil major, then one investment cannot be abandoned if it's premised on the destruction of a habitable planet. And if public money can be announced to build gas terminals in the blink of an eye, then it's not too late to fight for a far more solar and wind future. As Bill McKibben wrote in an excellent newsletter last week, Biden could help the transformation using powers only available during times of emergency by invoking the Defense Production Act to build large numbers of electric heat pumps and shipping them to Europe to mitigate the pain of losing Russian gas. That is the creative spirit we need in this moment, because if we are building new energy infrastructure, and we must surely be infrastructure for the future, not more toxic nostalgia, there are lessons we must take from this trembling moment we are living through, about the dangers of allowing nuclear weapons to proliferate unchecked, about the short-sightedness of shaming once again great powers, about the grotesque double standard in Western media, about which lands and which lives are treated as invadable and disposable, about which forced migrations are treated in crises for the people moving and which are treated for crises for the countries that they are moving to, about the willingness for everyday people to fight for their lands, and about the fights for self-determination and territorial integrity are celebrated as heroic and those are cast as terrorists. All of these lessons we must learn from living through this moment of naked history. And we must learn this one as well. It is still possible for humans to change the world we have built when life is on the line, and to do it quickly and dramatically. As we were 2 years ago when the pandemic was first declared, we are in yet another terrifying but highly malleable moment. War is reshaping our world, but so too is the climate emergency. The question is, will we harness wartime levels of urgency and action to catalyze climate action, making us all safer for decades to come? Or will we allow war to add more fuel to a planet already on fire? The challenge was put most sharply recently by Svetlana Kaskova, a Ukrainian scientist who is part of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change working group that produces this week's report. Even as her country was under the Kremlin's attack, she reportedly told her scientific colleagues in a virtual meeting that human-induced climate change and the war on Ukraine have the same roots, fossil fuels, and our dependence on them. Russia's outrages in Ukraine should remind us the corruption, influence of oil and gas ties, and the root of virtually every force that is destabilizing our planet. Putin's smug swagger, brought to you by oil, gas, and nukes. The trucks that occupied Ottawa for a month, harassing residents and filling their air with fumes and inspiring copycat convoys around the world. One of the occupation's leaders showed up in court a few days ago wearing a sign that says, "I love oil and gas," on the sweatshirt. She knows who her sponsors are. COVID denialism and surging conspiracy culture. Hey, once you have denied climate breakdown, denying pandemics, elections, and pretty much any form of objective reality is a light lift. At this late stage in the debate, much of this is well understood. The climate justice movement has won all the arguments for transformational action. What we are at risk of losing in the fog of war is our nerve, because nothing changes the subject like extreme violence, even violence that is being actively subsidized by the soaring price of oil. To prevent that from happening, we should do far more than take inspirations from Kharkovska, who has apparently told her colleagues in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in a closed-door meeting, "We will not surrender in Ukraine, and we hope the world will not surrender in building a climate-resilient future." Her words so moved her Russian counterpart, eyewitnesses reported that he broke ranks and apologized for the actions of his government. A brief glimpse into a world looking forward, not back. Wow. I didn't know that part of the story. I didn't know that ending. Holy shit. That's incredible.
Do you enjoy the Serfs but prefer not to have to use your eyeballs? Many are saying this. Well, we've got the solution for you. It's the Serf Times in podcast form. Available on most major podcasting networks now. If you enjoy it, please consider leaving a good review and feedback because it really helps the show out, apparently, and it's free, just like the podcast.
To our gods, Xander Corvus and Peyton L. Just, we beseech thee to smite down our enemies. To our monarch, Tom Spiker, we are but your humble court jesters, here to amuse you. To our lords, Trevor R., we give thanks for this spit of land for us to eke out this meager existence. To our knights, Merid, Cheryl Alvarez, Ruby Kelly, Ellie Leslie, Alex P., Brandon, Words Greenwood, Nate, that one guy, Hagbird Celine, Matthew Scarborough, Stellar Vision, Ariane McCarthy, Daniel Sutton, Coulter Smith, Val 9000, Jenna Tall, Quiet 185, Anna Loves Riley, Omni, Riley and Anna, Poodlehawk, The Tim Caucus, Multimondi, Trevor Yanis, Lemmy 101, Anthropophojak, Cern 42, Catherine, Radical Maniac, Ramon Acosta, Nkosin, Violent Orchard, Sophie Baby, Political Puppy, Andreas Chiringuito, Zach Christensen, Josh Mickelson, Todd Buckingham, and Todd Lajeunesse. We raise our flag in a veil, and we salute you, our friends.